Hello, good afternoon. So we all know about the duality of AI. I mean, it's a massive tool, but it also creates a lot of problems. And what we're discovering now is that most of the problems that are created by AI can only be solved by AI. It's sort of like diamond cutting a diamond, and we're going to get into some dynamics of that today. Focus on deepfakes. So here's an example. Audio?
From the former president or his legal team acting in bad faith. This is a deepfake example of what is possible with powerful computer and editing. It took around 72 hours to create this example from scratch using extremely powerful GPU. It could be improved with more computing time, but 90% of people cannot tell the difference.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we all know what deepfakes are at this point. I mean, they're really synthetic media created by AI, and for the most part, I mean, they're done using GANs, which are these generative adversarial network models, and you're using these very sophisticated models to manipulate images, videos, voices in a way that appear real, but they're actually not real. And it's a bigger problem than most people realize it. So it's not necessarily something that we're going to have to deal with in the future. We're already dealing with this right now. I mean, it's a pretty big issue, and it's around us spreading misinformation. It's eroding trust. I mean, we just went through a fairly intense election cycle in the U.S., and we saw a lot of the newer examples come up. And it is now a very powerful tool that is being used to manipulate public information. Let's look at just a couple of examples that have just come up recently that sort of underscores that. So there was this, recent case study. There's a recent use case where a CEO's voice was used to impersonate in a live Zoom meeting, and I mean the team was convinced that it is the CEO, and they were I guess fooled into wiring almost $250,000, which you might think that you know who you're talking to, but that's not really true. In fact, last year there was a situation in Asia where there was a video Zoom meeting, and the person was on the video, and actually it was apparently a deepfake, and everyone got fooled right in that meeting, and a much larger amount was wired. So this is a problem that is not a future issue. It's here right now. We also saw lots of content, lots of videos, and other aspects of imagery and voice for politicians saying things that they actually haven't said that, and using that to again manipulate public opinion. And this is something that you may not notice, but a big part of your LinkedIn network actually may not necessarily be real. A lot of these headshots, a lot of these people who reach out to you, for various sort of deals, marketing, other sort of partnership and collaboration proposals, are using these headshots that are not actually real people. I mean, they're just fake generated images that sort of are used to sort of impersonate some people. So we're going to talk about a very different angle today, unlike other things that you've heard about when you've heard these deepfake talks. But before we get into it, I want to talk a little bit about how deepfakes are created. So as I mentioned, GANs, generative adversarial networks, it's a deep learning architecture. And essentially, what GAN does is it trains two neural nets to compete against each other to generate new data from a given training data set. So for example, if you have an image data set, you could create new images from the images that it's looking at. Or let's say you have a database of songs that you've downloaded. Now, you could actually technically create, I guess that's debatable, but original music from that. And it's created by AI, and it's sort of looking at various patterns, and it's coming up with something that didn't exist before. So you could technically say it's original in some ways, but it's actually not real. It's not created by a human. It's created by AI, and it's fake. But when we talk about real versus fake, what we don't understand is that problem runs a lot deeper. When it comes to deepfakes, the conversation really centers around separating the real from the fake. That's what we've heard. Like, there's real and there's fake. Let's try to figure out what's real versus what's fake. But, there's a deeper question, and the deeper question is that what is real anyways? I mean, how well do we actually understand what we consider to be real? And so let's dive into that a little bit. That sort of underscores some of the challenge that we are just starting to face, but it's going to get a lot bigger in the next few years. So imagine looking through a camera's lens, right? I mean, you're expecting to capture reality as is. So what you see through a viewfinder, light, color, textures, is what you expect to see in the real world as well. Now, imagine the same situation where you're looking through the world, looking at the world through your own eyes, and you'd expect that, you know, your eyes is another kind of lens. I mean, it's really sort of seeing things as they are. But we know that's not true. I mean, unlike a camera lens, our brains are not just passive receivers of visual data. It's taking data, but it's creating a full production for our benefit. So it's manipulating reality. It's taking raw fragments, and it's creating what makes sense to us. So it's not necessarily what's actually out there. Let's take an example, right? So this is a common, illusion that you may have already sort of encountered. But you see two squares. There's A and B, and one appears later, right? But when I remove the surrounding context, you notice that they're actually the same color. Now, this is an example of your brain editing reality to try to fit what you're seeing into what makes sense to you, even though it's not really accurate. And in similar ways, I mean, it's not just about illusions. Color itself doesn't really exist the way you think it does. I mean, what you call the red, blue, green are simply how the brain perceives various wavelengths of light. And it's an interpretation of the wavelength. It's not necessarily what actually exists as the property of the matter that you're looking at. And the same is an issue with other aspects of your senses, like smell and taste. I mean, they don't exist the way you think as well. I mean, when you think about, let's say, the smell of coffee or the taste of chocolate that we've all grown to love so much, those aren't necessarily existing in the manner that we think it is. These are chemical interactions which are interpreted by the brain in a specific manner. So what a brain's doing is really sort of adding color, taste, smell, and other aspects to create meaning, of the world for us. I mean, what we see, it's adding perspective, it's adding meaning, but is it really actually what's out there? I mean, is it what, is real? It's debatable. Let's take a look at an interesting optical illusion. So what you see is a mask. It's concave on one side, which is hollow, and it's convex on the other side, and it's rotating, right? And so as it rotates, when the hollow side, the concave side, becomes visible, you see it as convex. Why is that? This is because your brain's expectations are so strong that it's bending reality real time right now, at this moment. So, interestingly, at this point, at this moment, in this room, you have two levels of awareness. At one level, you're aware this is an illusion. I just told you so. It's an illusion, right? It's just a mask. It's rotating. And you know it's hollow on one side. But you're unable to see it like that. Your brain is forcing you to perceive it in a certain way because it expects it to be a certain way. So imagine if your brain's expectation can bend reality and change your perception in such a simple and powerful way that even when you know what the truth is, you're unable to see it as such. What else is being altered in your reality without you actually ever realizing it? So the question is, what we think of as real is often just an interpretation, and it's not an absolute truth. And that's something that, we're getting a better and better sense of, in terms of sort of various aspects of cognitive AI, whether aspects of sort of understanding reality as is. I mean, when you look at from the neuroscientist standpoint or biology standpoint, and including sort of building compute models that make sense of it, we know that, our understanding of reality is very, very skewed, and what we think of real is not necessarily real. It's actually, in some ways, it's a fake. It's a fake generated by our brain. And so now you're looking at a situation where, it's not really a situation of sort of identifying real from fake. It's identifying fake created by AI versus fake created by your brain, and sort of trying to figure out which one is which. And so tackling deepfakes isn't just about identifying fabrications. I mean, it's about understanding first the essence of authenticity. And this is the next big challenge. This is the problem that we are going to start to face with and start to deal with if we, in the world that we're entering. And it's something that our minds grapple with pretty much every day. So how do we do this today? What are the current approaches of detecting deepfakes? If you look at, there's some well-known players that have pretty, I'd say, impressive, robust solutions out there. They're both creators, and that there's also detector abilities that exist in the marketplace. But largely, and I'm somewhat oversimplifying this, the approaches are in three different areas, right? So the first would be artifact analysis. This is where you're looking at some, detecting minor transitions, whether that be lighting or other aspects. You're looking at aspects of sort of hairline and where that might be, unnatural. You're looking at eye color and maybe even the blink rate, et cetera, inconsistency in the blinking. And you're trying to understand, if something's odd and off, and you're trying to detect fakes with that approach. Then there's the biometric inconsistencies, which is actually fairly common, right? So you're looking at, various aspects of voice and symmetry, facial symmetry, and you're trying to sort of understand, if something is AI generated versus that's actually real. And lastly, missing vocal biomarkers. Now, in my opinion, it's the deepfake problem is largely an audio problem, and that's also the most challenging one to date. Because as a human brain, we're not very, equipped to detect any of that. Our ears are not very good in trying to understand. You could take a clip from social media of your loved one and create fake using a cheap online tool. I'm not talking about something super sophisticated. And I could play that back to you. It could be, your wife or a loved one or a daughter or a husband, and you won't be able to tell the difference. So, our bar is pretty low in terms of how, the human brain detects it. But what the tools do is the tools are looking at certain biomarkers in the audio, which are usually absent in the synthetic segment, but they're present in the, natural voice. And they're looking for segments that don't have those biomarkers. And so they're trying to identify deepfakes like that. And that typically, between these three, is sort of the summation of how we detect deepfakes almost entirely in the industry today. So far, so good. It worked while it did, but it's not going to work anymore. And the reason is that these methods are outdated, right? So you have now more advanced modern GANs and new AI tools that can perfect the facial and lighting consistency. You are not going to find those transitions anymore, the difference in those transitions. They're absolutely perfect. And here's the kicker, right? So you have now tools that can synthesize the vocal biomarkers. So they can actually create synthetic biomarkers that are inserted into these audio segments that then fool all these tools. So think about, that's a good example is, if you've been following what's happening in the diamond industry, the synthetic diamonds, right? So diamonds created by nature, by compression over millions of years of compression on carbon. But you could simulate that in a lab. You could simulate that compression, create a diamond. What you create is still a diamond. It's actually a real diamond. Chemically, it's a diamond. Just the fact that nature didn't create it, you create it in the lab, right? So if you take it to a jeweler and say, okay, tell me the difference, you can't, because diamond is a diamond. It's just lab produced versus it's not a fake situation there, but it's just lab produced versus nature. And I think that's what you're now seeing. I mean, so you could synthesize these vocal biomarkers, and so you can insert that into these fake segments. You have perfect transitions. These tools don't work anymore, or, I mean, for the most part, will stop working in very near future. So what do you do? How do you tackle this problem? So, I mean, it's an arms race, so you have to keep one step ahead of it. One big aspect is to sort of look at other aspects, look at other capabilities that you can apply to this equation. So I've been, focused on deep learning and cognitive AI for a long time. In my company and in other, ventures that I've done, we've focused on, using neural nets to sort of build these advanced models that understand the state of mind. I mean, sort of understand cognition, understand decision-making, thought process. In the early days, we started to focus on building these models that focus on the voice modality, but even, more sort of, I'd say, minutely focused on not just what you're saying, but how you're saying something. So focused on pitch and tonal variance, prosody, et cetera. So we could extract a lot of these signals from a real conversation and create a good assessment of what's happening in that interaction, the emotional state, the behavioral state, but also looking at decision-making, intent, thought process in an interaction. But another thing we were able to do is to focus on a holistic dynamic of that person, tap into about 75 to 100 different attributes, ranging from how fast someone's speaking to various emotions and behaviors they're typically expressing that are unique to them, to create what we started to call a behavioral profile. Think of this as a conversational signature that uniquely identifies how you interact and how you connect with somebody. And when we had that, when we started to apply it in a variety of use cases, improving the business outcomes, including national security and defense, et cetera, and we started to also sort of think about what else can we do with this behavioral signature, this conversational signature that we have created, and can we go solve for this problem that is soon to explode? And so we'll talk about that. And so one of the things we started to do is think about how do we use behavioral profile or behavioral profiling for deepfake speech detection. Now that's not obviously intuitive, but it made a lot of sense when we started to test this out. Let me show you how this works. This is a little bit of an eye chart here, but I'm going to break this down into some simpler parts. And this is, again, grossly oversimplifying really how this technology works, just to help you understand sort of how it can be applied to this particular problem set. So the first thing you need to do is to, if you have audio that you're looking at, you're analyzing it, first you have to separate the utterances into individual, separate the audio into individual utterances. And you also have to isolate the speaker of interest. So who are you going to target? Which speaker are you trying to, identify fakes for, essentially? And then what you do is you take those natural utterances that you've now separated, and you create synthetic utterances that mimic those natural utterances. So you're actually creating deepfakes, for each of those utterances. And then you use those synthetic utterances to improve the model. You help the model look at those synthetic utterances so that it can become deepfake aware. It becomes more resilient. And then what you do is, tap into these attributes that I mentioned, between 75 to 100 different attributes that create this behavioral profile. Or that number of, the time that it takes to do that is shrinking. We started at about 50 to 60 seconds of audio. Now it's shrinking to maybe 10 to 20 seconds of audio. So technically, in a 10 to 20 second interaction, you could create a behavioral profile that's robust enough for these purposes. So you have the utterances that you have separated. You've also synthesized that, or you created fake utterances from those real utterances. You've had the model look at these fake utterances to get a better sense of what fake looks like, and you created a behavioral profile. So that's what you've done so far. And then the next step would be to compare each of those utterances and those profile, the behavioral profile that has seen all these fakes and learned from that, and look for inconsistencies between that. So you're matching each utterance to sort of like the benchmark, which is the behavioral profile. And so this is where you're looking at, very minute, subtle nuances in terms of voice and tonal dynamics that are really, in some ways, your own unique signature that you're leaving in your interaction, in your voice, and we're trying to identify, how that might be different in a fake. So, for example, when you talk about expressing an emotion, let's say you're expressing anger. I mean, there are obviously some things that are giveaways, like you speaking in a loud, angry voice and you're cussing. I mean, okay, I think you're angry. But a lot of other people express anger in very subtle, unique ways, right? So, for example, if you take, like say someone like Elon Musk, I mean, there's a lot of audio and video out there. You notice that, he's not going to get loud. He's not going to start yelling and cussing. So you don't have any of those cues. But certain pronunciation and certain tonal dynamics of certain words change when he's angry or is triggered. And we all do that. I mean, the words that we use on a very regular basis, normal basis, I mean, those pronunciations we change a little bit. I mean, when we're excited, we say it a little differently. When we're angry, we say it a little differently. So in these models, we can look at those subtle differences real time, and we can sort of look at those segments and say, you know what, there's something here, and that gives us the clue. So in a sense, this is the larger approach of sort of using these very complicated models that were designed for something entirely different, and then applying it to solve for this deepfake detection problem that, again, it's going to be a huge thing. But one of the big advantages is that you're not just detecting this at a segment level, but very importantly, you can explain why you've deemed something as fake. And explainability and transparency is a huge, huge upside. It's a huge plus. So rather than just saying, this segment's fake, or and this is, and a lot of these other tools sometimes are black boxes. They can't really explain why, but they just say that they're fake, and they may or may not be right. But you have to be able to explain why you have deemed so. And so you can deep dive into and say, this particular aspect, this tonal variance, this attribute, here's the mismatch between the behavioral profile. So you can dig deeper into why you've made that assessment. Another big advantage is that it's very scalable and it's versatile. So you could potentially run this on, since you're doing sort of triage and you're coming up with a person of interest, you could run this on terabytes of audio and identify proverbially a needle in the haystack, and you'd say, off this terabytes of audio on social media, you can identify this one fake segment for this one speaker that you're looking at through this approach. And you can't do that with some of these other approaches, because you have to literally look at these audios frame by frame, and look at those inconsistencies. Again, that may not work in the first place. And another neat little advantage is, most of these models are tone-based. They're not word-based, right? So you're not using ASR or speech-to-text, so you're not taking the audio, converting that into the spoken word. You're purely extracting these signals on the pitch and tonal variance, intonations, and prosody. So it's language agnostic. It works across accents, dialects, various sort of cultural differences. It just works. You'd have to calibrate it sometimes a little bit on a specific training data set, but for the most part, it just works across the board. So I think that was sort of like the essence of what I wanted to talk about today. I'm gonna, get into a couple of other things. Aspects of sort of what else do we need to focus on? So the future directions in detection, and I see like 3 specific areas which I feel there's a lot more work that needs to be done. I also sort of think about, if you're thinking about starting a company and, you have a company, but you say, where else can I go? One aspect is real-time detection. No real good tools that exist today, right? So identifying something real-time as it's being streamed, as the audio is being streamed and as the audio is being uploaded, like say on YouTube. Not after the fact, but as it's going. So, so building some of those real-time capabilities are going to become very important, because if you're going to detect something as fake, a couple of days later, it's useless. So that clip's already gone viral, everybody's seeing it, Nobody's going to see your clip explaining that it was viral or your press release saying that it's viral. I mean, it's sort of like, it doesn't really solve the purpose. So this is something definitely that needs to be solved. The content provenance, using digital signatures, again, some work has started to happen, but largely it's unsolved for, and there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And the last one is obvious, the multimodal analysis, right? So currently we're still working in our different silos, and people looking at the facial aspects, they're looking at various aspects of tone and voice, but putting it all together, including using other modalities like body language and other dynamics that may be slightly hard to measure, and putting it all together, fusing it together into a holistic aspect of detection will become very, very key very soon. So on the content provenance, I mean, I think there's a few areas that I'd say offer a lot of opportunity. I mean, there's digital signatures, which are probably the lowest hanging fruit. I mean, and also sort of combining that with blockchain, that's an aspect that a lot of original media and content creators are already looking at, whether that's art or that's like audio, video, other aspects of sort of content creation, and sort of like leaving certain, I'd say, signatures and points of origin to identify where is this content coming from. Metadata is, again, a slightly different approach, but you could sort of have embedded metadata that sort of allows you to sort of identify the source. And then watermarks, I mean, it's an age-old approach of sort of identifying authenticity and ownership. Overall, massive entrepreneurial opportunity. It's just getting started. Last year, it was about a $7 billion market. In about, I'd say, another 9 years or so, 10 years or so, it's going to be about $120 billion market. Just last year, I think it was roughly about 100,000 videos circulating around that were known deepfakes. That's expected to double and quadruple, almost like in a hockey stick as we go forward. But the problem is that while this is going to happen, these are going to be generated by tools that are going to be so sophisticated that none of the tools that exist in the market today, including the ones that are offered by the top industry leaders, are going to potentially work. You need a completely different approach. You need to sort of understand dynamics of cognitive AI, metaphysics, aspects of reality and neuroscience to really understand, how are we going to sort of, identify what's real versus what's fake. And again, sort of, I said this earlier, it's less of a situation where you're trying to understand a difference between real and fake, what you're saying, like, it's a fake that is generated by brain versus fake that is generated by AI, and how do I tell which one's which? It's really mind-bending. When you have these models, lastly, just wanted to add this one point, has a fairly broad set of applications outside of just generating deepfakes. The obvious areas are on the cybersecurity side, where you're sort of looking at various email patterns and detecting phishing, algos and attacks. Financial fraud is a huge opportunity. This is obviously the first area of attack on the deepfake side. And now you can use these behavioral profiles and these behavioral engines to sort of minimize some of these financial fraud aspects. And then content moderation, which has been the hot topic over the last few years. And you could start to use these models to also solve for that problem. That's it. Thank you. We'll take questions.
Thank you very much. The microphone, please. Here in the first row. Left, here in the first row. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Blair. I'm American. I live here in Belgrade. Aside from my business, I have my own TikTok called Blair in Belgrade. I'm curious, many brands and businesses today are creating like AI content creators or influencers. And some are open about saying, hey, this is an AI, versus some are not open to the audience or their customers that this is not a real person. So what are your thoughts? Like, how can we now moving forward detect if someone's an AI influencer or it's actually a real person? And do companies have a responsibility to be open about that? This, I guess, new face of the brand is an AI creation.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's happening. And I think that particular problem is actually easily solvable by effective regulations. And some of that I already sort of see coming together. So there are some regulations that are coming together where you are expected and you are, you have to identify if what you're creating is AI generated. I mean, you have to sort of, make that very explicit. So again, I think that, we already have laws around, I'd say, misrepresentation. We have laws around defrauding. And so I don't think we have to reinvent the society as is. I mean, around those particular areas, we just need to enforce it and say, okay, here's a tool. It could create a lot of advantages. It could also potentially, cause problems, and you could potentially cause harm. And, in a situation that it might cause harm, you need to do X, Y, Z, and otherwise you'll be penalized for that. And so I think, that obviously should be worked on purely from that enforcement and regulation standpoint, in my opinion.
Super interesting. The question comes back to the same techniques that you're using to generate the detection is basically the next step in the arms race by the other side that's trying to create the deepfakes. So, I mean, and that profiling that you're doing that you can do to make the litmus test between that one is super insightful about influencing the person. So then you have an influence profile on that specific persona. So, I mean, how do you get ahead of the arms race on that? Because now you've showed the technique. They'll be like, oh, that's clever. I'll use this in my next generation of deepfakes. And by the way, I'll get additional information on the next on that person that's useful for even better manipulation. So you can think of on the white hat side, it's the marketing companies, but on the back of that, dark side, it's it can be used as manipulation. So how do you address that? Because it's continual.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big problem. That's all I'll say, largely towards that. I mean, it is 100% an arms race. Just like similar analogies, like, using sort of like an iron dome versus missiles that can, penetrate those iron domes. And once you have it, then you can figure out how does it work and how can I fool that systems. And I think for the most part, it's something that needs to be like, at least on the, I'd say, on the creation side, it's a free for all. And it started off purely from, the entertainment industry, and it was just sort of like fun, let's do this. And also, you want to use these GANs and you want to use these sort of, these models to create new content. It helps. I mean, I want my images to be created. I want to, come up with some videos, etc. But now, what you're sort of seeing is that, the detection side is, for the most part, we still don't worry about this too much. We think of this as like an interesting technology dilemma. Yes, they exist. Does it really bother me? Does it really affect me on a day-to-day basis? And you'd say, I don't think it affects me. I think it's like an intellectual and academic question, but like, is it going to cause me harm on a daily basis? And I think what you're sort of seeing is that you're getting to that point where that's going to happen very, very frequently. And so one aspect is you need more investment and more resources on, the detection methodologies and start to do some original research. I've yet to, we're not seeing too much research on some of these dynamics. We have one particular angle of going at it, but, short answer to your question is it's 100% an arms race. As soon as sort of disclose a detection methodology, someone's going to try to figure out how to break that, and someone's going to try to, similar to what happened with vocal biomarkers. As soon as they detected, identified this is how they're detecting it, now people start to work on building models that synthesize these vocal biomarkers. So yeah, you got to keep up, keep investing, keep doing more research, and I mean, I must say that I don't know if at some point it becomes it's indistinguishable and you need a completely different approach. You can't detect it, and you have to rely on something completely different. And maybe it's more on the content provenance side. And so you technically can't detect it, but you're looking at those markers and sort of identifying it as such.
Yeah, okay.
Quick follow-up. What happens in a world where the deepfakes are just ubiquitous? To what you just said, at an individual level, like what happens? Do you ever have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it looks like a simulation. I mean that would be the perfect deepfake, right? I mean, so it's like you're living in a simulated reality where the beings inside them have no idea that they're in one. I mean, and it's it's entirely and fully simulated to an extent that you can't tell a difference, and you don't even care about the difference. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you for the talk. My question is, can you share how much false positives and false negatives in your detection at the moment are you having? And you mentioned 1 minute of audio or source is now zipped to almost 15 seconds so that you can determine is it a true or not. I have 2 questions, these numbers, and second, what is stopping me contacting you? Can you create my deepfake so that every single time I appear somewhere, you have me in your safety database?
Yeah. So first question, it's a really good question, and I think it depends on the aspect that you're trying to measure. I mean, because you can't broadly. I mean, I think in the industry we use the F-score. It's sort of like false positives and accuracy, and sort of combining that together towards one score. So when we started to look at specific aspects of emotions, there's certain emotions that we were sort of able to tap into with very high F-scores. I mean, higher than a human brain, right? So for example, right now, if you look at our human brain's ability to extract the state of mind, which may be your emotional variance as you're speaking to me, because my brain's doing that and your brain's doing the same. That F-score, technically, when we've sort of measured that, it's about 0.8. So your brain's about 80% right, 20% wrong. So about false positives about 20%. That's your average human brain. Obviously, some people are better, some people are worse. There's also science that shows females are better than men. It's true. So when we looked at that, we crossed that threshold somewhere around 2021. We crossed the 0.8 threshold that was equal to the human ability, and now we're like 0.95, 0.96. So much, much better than human. Is it 100%? No, but it's better than human, so that's pretty good, right? I mean, so I think on that particular aspect. But when you get into more complex aspects, trying to understand, stress, control, distress, other aspects of maybe sarcasm and other behavioral dynamics. It's 0.7, 0.8, equal or below human ability on those dynamics. But I think those things don't matter as much, because when you're doing a macro level of assessment, when you're building a model that's sort of combining, so your F-scores will vary all over the map on these individual signals. But when you're putting it together, and you're looking at a macro assessment of here's the problem statement, and can I look at this audio and detect if it's fake? So that particular, so if you ask me and say, what's your ability, what's your sort of accuracy level for identifying a segment as fake using these models, it's in the high 90s. That's pretty good because it's scalable, it's language agnostic, and among other things. And it's using an approach that is future-proofing and bulletproofing, right? And so you'd say, okay, well, have a tool that looks at missing vocal biomarkers, and that's 100% accurate because it's either there or not there. I'd say, yeah, it's either 100% or 0%, depending on the creation tool. And there's no creation tools that exist today, by the way, that can synthesize or simulate those behavioral dynamics. That just doesn't exist. So that technology doesn't exist. At some point, it might. Then we have to come up with a new approach.
I cannot come to you in the office, you digitally scan me, and that's it. You go through some scenarios, you take samples, and you say, okay, you have a clone of me. So not yet.
Well, we could create a behavioral profile. We could create a signature. We could do this on a phone call. We don't even need you to come in the office. And if you're worried about your fakes being out there, you could create a benchmark and start to sort of, look at. That's, typically what happens with public speakers and, politicians, people of interest. You sort of create a benchmark, and you don't need a lot of data, by the way. You could create this. The actual signature, the behavioral profile, you can create in 10, 20, 30 seconds. But when you're creating a model of that persona, in sort of overall, just need 10, 15 minutes of audio. That's all you really need.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have more time for questions.
One more question regarding this. Do we have to renew this model on certain periods in order to keep track of differences?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? And where are you? I can't find you.
Here.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Do you have to renew this model on a certain period of time in order to keep track or better recognize?
Oh, yeah. So, the behavioral profile technically can be renewed every interaction. Right, so when we apply this in call centers, the first profile gets created during first interaction between agent and client, and then every interaction improves on that profile. Interestingly enough, what we see is, so there's a couple of interesting things. One, I mentioned this, the reason I use the word signature is that we're seeing that they are very unique, just like a fingerprint. So we have processed millions so far. We haven't found a single profile that's identical to another profile. So they are very different. There's subtle differences, but they're different and they're unique. The other thing is that, what we see is that after the second or the third interaction, you kind of reach the point of diminishing returns. That I guess speaks to that the models are working really well, and so it extracts all it needs to extract with small amounts of data and relatively quickly. So you don't have to. If it's a third, fourth, fifth interaction, you can just ignore it. You'll say, I have enough. Now, what you see is because it's in some ways reflecting who you are today, and that will change. You will evolve. You will behave differently in the next, in the future. In the next 5, 6 years, that profile may need to be renewed, and it might, change itself.
Thank you. Any more questions? Here, yes, in the middle.
Hi, interesting talk, thank you. So I think I see a lot of military aspect and application forces, like intelligence, like a government collecting samples of each of its citizens and like creating profile of every citizen and detect who said what. Like I'm a bit scared about this.
Yes. There are, we actually are backed by In-Q-Tel. In-Q-Tel is CIA's VC firm. And we're working on certain implementations that are, but again, our job, we're largely a research entity. Obviously we're commercializing it. We have a business on the private sector side. It's about pushing the area of research on certain areas and building specific models that solve for specific problems. We're not building ourselves any solutions or any products that are specifically designed for the military. But I'll say there's an interesting thing that pops up when you sort of talk about that, right? So when you look at adoption of AI in general, the government's been sort of had the first step across the world, right? And the private sector has always been the second. Same happened with internet, right? Same is happening with AI. And when you're focused on decision making and thought process, there's if you look at Daniel Kahneman's work, 2 levels of thinking, systems 1 and systems 2 thinking. Since systems 1 is the more intuitive, obvious, effortless, and systems 2 is more deliberate As a human, 95% of decisions we make every living, waking moment is systems one thinking. And only 4 to 5% of decisions we make are systems two thinking, which is we're crunching numbers and making a deliberate. Everything else is automatic, it's intuitive. most of the implementations on the AI side has been on the systems too. That's why you see sort of seeing like, crunching lots of data, processing it, coming up with answers on that. And even coming up with decisions on what needs to happen based on the macro analysis of that. What you're seeing is with these cognitive AI models, you now have the ability to add systems one thinking to your original decision making. And so that's what's happening. So what's going to happen is they are going to be combined. So systems one and systems two, you're going to have an AI model that is going to decide what to do, because there's an incoming missile coming, what to do in this situation. And it's going to not just use the data, it's also going to take intuition. And the human, so it's similar to a human sitting in front of that. I can say, okay, let the human brain decide. And the human brain is going to obviously look at the data, all the experience, everything that they're looking at, but at the end of the day it says like, what should I do? Yes or no? And a big part of that is intuition. So you're going to combine that and make a more informed, more accurate decision, just like a human brain does.
Final question, if there is one more. No. Maybe I could just ask you a quick one, and that is the policy. How is actually AI adoption and regulation, how does it differ around the world when it comes to deepfake detection?
So I think I see specifically, I think there's definitely a big difference in larger aspects of AI, in terms of how the different parts of the world are treating it. As you all know, certainly it's a whole different ballgame in Europe versus US. We see the difference. I'm in Europe all the time. We have teams in Athens, and I see a stark difference between the two regions. But I'd say on deepfakes, I think there's a fair amount of consistency. I think everyone agrees that it needs to be tackled in a certain way. So I think those regulations that are coming up in terms of like either disclosing if you're creating this, or like even sort of like other aspects of transparency, including how you're making those decisions. those are fairly consistent. That's what we're seeing so far. So I'd say that's a good thing.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Rana Gujral, this is
Thank
for you. Thank you so much. Thank you.